have an unidentified flying object.
I'm Jack Oswald, and you're listening.
This is Hudson Hamay, and you're listening to...
I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to
Dr. Stephen M. Greer. Dr. Greer, welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be with you tonight.
Well, let's go ahead and start with the campaign that ends illegal UFO and free energy secrecy, because that's obviously what it all comes down to. And after I saw the movie Sirius at the premiere, a friend turned to me and said, I don't think it's about the shock value. I said, no, it can't be. It's about the technology, the free energy, anything that they would be getting from these ETs visiting us, that as opposed to using fossil fuels.
Right. Well, I think that there's a number of issues. One is the psychological warfare value. The new film we're working on, which is already broken all crowdfunding metrics for a publicly crowdfunded movie, is called Unacknowledged, and the title Unacknowledged comes from the unacknowledged special access projects, which are the deep black illegal projects that run in corporate America and around the world, and also in the U.S. government, where the people who are supposed to supervise our spending have no idea what's going on. These are completely illegal projects and outrageous. And so we call this movie Unacknowledged, and they're going to have a book that comes out at the same time with it called Unacknowledged, the same title. It's going to have an unbelievable amount of evidence and documents and top secret military whistleblower testimony from all over the world. And this is being supported by the public, and I'm very excited. We're at our 6-week mark since we launched the project, and we had a minimum goal of $500,000, and we've raised $450,000 in the first 6 weeks, which is a crowdfunding record. And we've also signed up a major international distributor for the film. So our goal is to put so much hard-hitting material in this movie and in the book, and to get it out all over the world, that no one can deny the reality that the UFOs are real, and that there are covert programs that have these technologies that are illegally keeping them away from the public. And I think this is the time where we have to all come together and say, look, we're not asking the government to do anything. We're going to do it ourselves, which means we're going to produce this disclosure, where this is the next big wave in the disclosure movement, which I founded in the year 2000, but which was really an outgrowth of Project Starlight when we were briefing the Clinton administration and his CIA director in the 1990s. So this has been 25 years in the making, and we're at the point now where the numbers of people are just amazing who are coming forward, both in terms of new evidence and material, but we're making a call, and I'm going to say this on your show right now. Anyone in a covert program dealing with UFOs or the technology or zero-point energy, free energy technology, who is willing to come forward in this movie should contact us as soon as possible. We have new witnesses from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, from the CIA and others coming forward, and we want to have more. And the more, the better. So we have set up everything so that people can provide their documents and their testimony without any risk at all to themselves for punishment for speaking. Because in 1997 and 98, we proved that all of these projects were being run illegally, and we sent a letter to every agency in the U.S. government stating that unless otherwise directed, this is an illegal project, and unless you tell us otherwise, we're going to start releasing all this information and data, and that's what we did. I founded the Global Disclosure Movement, and since then there are 15 countries that have opened up their UFO files. There are many people who've come forward, but we need to take this to the next level where we have deeper and more substantial whistleblowers that come forward, and also people who come forward with the technology. So the other thing we're asking for from the public is to network with people who may have one of these free energy devices. whether or not they're associated with a government contractor or the government. They may just be an inventor, because we have now identified the people who can fund the research and get this out to the public in a massive way. And I mean people that I had no idea we would ever be able to get, who are very supportive of our objectives of ending the lock that big oil and nuclear power has on the planet that's destroying the biosphere. So the people are all in place. We need to find someone with the technology, and we will feature it in the film, and we will feature it in the book, and we will massively disclose it at a global disclosure concert event, with the film coming out and the book coming out with, and our objective is to have at least 1 billion people to 2 billion people watching, with a lot of A-list celebrities on the stage with a free energy device. And to do this, we're going to have to find someone who has something that's not a fake. You know, there are a lot of fakes out there, and we've spent almost $1 million trying to run down things that have been complete frauds and fakes. But we know that there are people out there listening right now who either have such a device or know of someone who does, and they need to get hold of us, 6 weeks ago. But, I mean, as of immediately, because we have a team of people who can interface with them and bring that technology and secure it. Now, I have to say, our objective with the technology is to massively disclose it to the public. And the person, you know, if the inventor wants to be anonymous, they can be. If the person who invented it needs to have to be compensated for their work, we have people who can fund them and compensate them. But we need to get it out, and we need to get it out in a way that is as open-sourced and massively disclosed as possible. Because if you keep something like this secret, you know, Dr. J, every single person and team we've worked with who've tried to do this secretively, they're all dead, or they've all disappeared, or they've all had their technology stolen under national security orders. So what we're saying to people is don't repeat history. Let's make new history. The old way is to do this with intellectual property and secrecy, and it always fails. So that's a big part of what we want to do with this campaign, is not only bring out the truth about the fact that we're not alone and that the UFOs are real, and that these projects are being run completely illegally without the proper oversight of the people we elect and send to Washington. But also that the technologies that are at the heart of the secrecy would give us a completely new civilization within our lifespan. And if people have even a proof of principle prototype that is self-running. Now let me explain what that means. We're not interested in something that's plugged into a wall outlet. Just forget about that, because there's too many ways to trick a meter and do stuff. We're interested in something that is a self-running machine. If it has a startup battery or capacitor, that startup power system needs to be charged from the output of it, and the output at the same time is running lights and fans and doing some real, work in the real world. That's, some people would call this a perpetual motion machine or energy machine. It's not. If someone knows what they're doing, they should be able to just do this by understanding that the 0 point and quantum vacuum energy field can be accessed through electronic systems. And we want to find someone who has something operational. To date, we have not identified one that meets our criteria of the loop being closed and running itself. But as soon as we find that, we will do a massive disclosure around that. It will be featured in this movie, which will be seen all over the world, and we will have it at a disclosure concert that will have just a huge percentage of the world's population watching. Because we feel that the only way to do this is to pull all of this out of the shadows and secrecy and put it out in the light of day. And if you do it that way, and with social media and the internet, you can do it so that no matter what, they can't shut it down. Even if the big lamestream media says, we've been contacted by the CIA, we're not going to cover this story. Who cares? If you have Leonardo DiCaprio on the stage with this thing, because he's a big environmentalist, you're going to get 1 billion people to see it. Who cares about CNN? So we have to do this. I think I tell people right now, the people have to rise up in a peaceful revolution and end the secrecy. And that's why we're calling this the campaign that ends UFO and free energy secrecy, not the campaign that's asking the government to do it for us. because the government is so screwed up and so dysfunctional. I've had a place in Washington for 18 years. I'm there all the time meeting with people in the government. It is so dysfunctional you can't even believe it. As much as you think it's broken, it's worse than that. And the truth of the matter is that the people who are politicians, I doubt they have the courage to do this. And even if they start doing it, they're usually threatened and they back off. So I think this is where we, the people, my home right here is near Thomas Jefferson's house. And I tell you that we, the people, are going to have to step forward and make this change ourselves, not counting on the government to do it for us. And I know for a fact we can do it, but we need to come together. And I think people should go to our website, which is SiriusDisclosure.com. It's SIRIUS, like the star, SiriusDisclosure, all one word.com. And, even if you make a contribution of $1 or $2, or just network this to your friends, and there's a toolbar at the top where you can contact us if you're a military witness or a government contractor witness, or if you know of someone who has one of these free energy devices. And we have a whole team of people who we've just put here in place in Virginia who are working on this full time, 17 hours a day. And we're hoping that we'll be able to bring this, all of this out late this year or early next year is our target, and bring this forward. And I think we're racing the clock here, because if you look at all the comments by Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and people who are beginning to cover, even the New York Times and CNN are covering the fact that John Podesta, the chief of staff for President Clinton and the man who put together the Obama cabinet and who we provided the briefing for Obama through, John Podesta and Hillary Clinton have both been making open comments about getting to the bottom of the UFO issue. And the question is, will they really do it this time? I think we need to do it for them, or make it an inevitability that it has to happen.
There's a few things you said that I think are super important before we move on to the next topic. I made this horrible mistake a few years ago, if you recall, when we were live on air, when I mentioned USAPs, but instead of saying unacknowledged, I said unauthorized secret access programs. And there's a lot of people out there who may think unauthorized and unacknowledged are the same thing, but they are two drastically different things. Before I go on to some of these other points that you hit on, do you mind reminding people why it's so important to know the difference?
Yeah, when you talk about an unacknowledged project, you're really talking a USAP, literally the way it works. I'll give you a really crystal clear example. I have one of my military advisors was in a nearly $3 billion unacknowledged special access project. Now, that was just one compartmented project. And the way it worked was, they got together when they were running this. They were taken into an underground skiff, a secure communication intelligence facility. Everyone had all of their cell phones, watches, anything taken away from them. They went down there. There was a security officer, and the security officer had a gun and a clip, and he pulled a bullet out of the clip. He held it up and he said, "Sir," he turned to everyone. He says, "Men, you are in a unacknowledged special access project, and if you speak of this project to anyone, including your commanding officer, your 4-star general, anyone who's not actually in this room right now, there's a bullet. It has your name on it. It will find you, and you're a dead man."
And that's
now,
what they use.
That's how they work. So it doesn't really matter. So if someone is the President of the United States, or a Senate Intelligence Committee member, or even I briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is almost as big as the CIA that's inside the Pentagon for the Department of Defense intelligence gathering. I briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on and on. All of these people have been denied access to these unacknowledged special access projects, which are completely unconstitutional, outrageous, and illegal. And so there's $100 to $200 billion a year being stolen from the U.S. government that go into these programs. And, look, and no less a figure than Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense for George W. Bush. We have it on tape, and it's in the movie Sirius, which, by the way, you can see for free right now on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/S-disclosure, S as in Sirius, but it's just S-disclosure. And we've already, in the past month, had 400,000 people look at that. Now, in that movie, we have a clip where Donald Rumsfeld, who was no crusader for transparency. He was an arch-conservative neocon who got us into Iraq and to Afghanistan. And he is saying on the day before 9/11 that there's a $2.3 trillion unaccounted for in the Department of Defense budgets over the last few years. Now I understand it's $8.5 trillion. And this is our money. Taxpayer money, and it's going into these projects. And so, what we did an assessment in 1997 and 98 after I had a lot of high-level meetings, including with the CIA director for President Clinton. And we concluded these projects are criminal enterprises, like a mafia. And we wrote a letter to that effect and basically said, we are hereby releasing everyone from their national security oaths who have been involved in anything related to UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, or the technologies and the reverse engineering efforts. Any documents they have, fair game. Any testimony they want to provide is open source, fair game. Any materials they have, fair game. And do you know that we have up on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com a link to almost 5 or 6 dozen top secret people's testimony. Not a single one of those people have been harassed or even contacted or threatened, not legally or personally, because we have a system set up that they have all been untouchable. So what we're saying is now we need another whole wave, a huge wave of more of these folks, not just from the U.S., but from other countries as well, because the group that deals with the secrecy on this is a transnational group. It's not just in the U.S. It's in Canada, the U.K., Australia, China, Russia. It's all over the world. And we need to have people understand that they can come forward and we will be able to do this without them having any penalties under the law. Now, a lot of people say, well, couldn't they still be at risk? I said, not if they do it right. If they do it publicly and massively, people are going to be left alone. Why? Because the secret groups that are involved with this don't want to be caught in a public assassination again. They don't want to be caught in a public disaster. So, because they know that will expose them. They only have the power they have by lurking in the shadows of secrecy. And so if we do this in a massively disclosure way, in a mass disclosure fashion, with millions, and preferably 1 billion or 2 people who see it, we can bring out not only the information that ends the secrecy and the knowledge, but also the science and technology. So that the technology is proven that we can pull energy from the 0 point and quantum vacuum field, that we can run our houses and cars without fossil fuels or nuclear power, and we can start a civilization that at last becomes what Michikaku would call a level 1 civilization, where we're no longer destroying the biosphere and we can live peacefully in a just and a socially just and abundant world without damaging the biosphere. And then, and only then, are we going to be welcome to go out into space to have become part of this interstellar family of civilizations. They're waiting on us, on Earth, to get our act together, and have been incredibly patient for the last 70 years since we shot down those craft at Roswell, and that was a shoot down. That was an electromagnetic weapon at Roswell that knocked those 2 or 3 craft down. So, and we have an FBI document that explains this, actually, which will be in this new movie. So I think people have to understand that the unacknowledged special access projects have been running amok since the 50s, completely illegally ever since Eisenhower lost control of them. And we're on solid legal ground, and moral ground to bring this information out. And we need mass defections from these covert programs and people who are willing to go on the record, name, rank, and serial number with their DD-214s, their discharge papers from the military if they were in the military, or their employment record if they were employed, who will give testimony about what they have seen or heard or worked on. And that's what we're asking for tonight. And we need people who have these technologies to step forward, who have them, if they're willing to have them appropriately verified and vetted and massively disclosed. Now, we know some people who have some of these technologies and they say, well, we want to keep it secret. I said, well, you'll keep it secret like Stan Meyer kept his things secret until he was in the grave. Stan Meyer had a toroidal donut-shaped free energy device that had a national security order on it, and he took that to the grave with him.
Really?
And then yes.
Wow.
Our team went in there and saw it, John. We saw it. And what happened is that my project was trying to get that entire archive and all those materials of just a few years ago, and a group from Michigan jumped in, had more money than we had. They bought it, kept it all secret, and then I heard in the past year that entire team has been eliminated.
I wouldn't be surprised. We have a history in the United States of using people and getting rid of them. I mean, there's so many instances that can be shown.
Well, the reason for it is that they all make the same mistake. They're all doing this as if they're handling a new smartphone from Apple, and keeping it secret. When you're dealing with an explosive new technology that would completely make obsolete all the oil and gas in the world, you have to develop a strategy that meets that challenge. And that's what we're doing. That's what we've done. But the problem is you get a lot of people who've been successful in business and technology, and they don't understand the deep national security state. They don't understand the cabal. They don't know what buzzsaw they're about to be walking into and the landmines that are out in front of them that they're going to step on and blow up. We do, because this is what we've been doing for 25 years. So what we want to do is be the launch vehicle for one of these technologies if someone would cooperate with us in allowing it to get launched to the world. And, a year ago or even 6 months ago, I couldn't have said, look, we really don't have a lot of resources where we could compensate you. Now we have people on our team where if we can put one of these devices in front of some of these folks and someone if the patent needs to be bought out or if they need to be compensated, we can do it. We can absolutely do it. And so this is a game. This is a huge game changer in the new energy effort, because now we have the means to actually take anything that someone has, and if they've been waiting for a time to do it, don't wait any longer. It's now, because the Earth is in trouble, the biosphere. And the other thing that we're in great trouble with is, I have a big concern. The fact that the mainstream media started covering the comments of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta on this makes me think someone's pulled the trigger to do a false flag disclosure where sort of like what Werner von Braun, who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, said. He says they're going to hoax a threat from outer space, and it will fool everyone on Earth, and it's all a lie. It's all a big lie. And what I think is that I'm a little concerned that we need to hurry. This is, the June of 2016, and Werner von Braun was making those warnings on his deathbed 40 years ago in the 1970s. And I think that we're at the point where something that's 1,000 times worse than 9/11 is going to be unleashed on the world if we, the people, don't get ahead of it and expose the lie for what it is. So that's the other thing we're asking for. People who know about what I call the cosmic false flag operation need to step forward and need to step forward now. Some years ago, I don't know if you remember this story, Dr. J, there was a man that came to the 1997 briefings for Congress that we organized in Washington, who was on an interagency committee, intelligence committee, that had all the plans in place to launch a false flag operation that would be like a cosmic 9/11 that would fool everyone. And he, the night before we did the briefings for members of Congress, he was approached by people he had worked for back in the 70s when he was on this interagency committee, and they begged him not to tell this story, and they took him out to a secure location out in Virginia outside of Washington until after the event was over. But he had told me about what he was going to testify to, and he was going to testify to the fact that, and we need more people like him now to come forward, that there was a plan that was fully operational in 1974. And he knew it had been in place well before the time he was involved, where they could hoax by using man-made anti-gravity devices, things that look like UFOs, and by using holograms and other special effects, and hoax an alien attack on something on Earth that would convince people that we had to quick unite the world, as Ronald Reagan said, around an alien threat. And he said it was all a hoax and it's all stagecraft. But he said everything was in place over 40 years ago. And I then found people who said, oh, yes, that plan was concocted by people at the CIA in the 1950s. And that's what they meant in these documents that we're going to release through this film and book that talk about the psychological warfare value of the subject and why they engaged Disney Studios. This is in a 1953 document, by the way, to do movies about this and Little Green Men. They wanted it either ridiculed or they wanted it spun in the direction of a threat from outer space. So all this stuff that's going on with the mainstream media beginning to cover this, and covering some people in the UFO ghetto, the sort of subculture of the UFO world, makes me concerned because the spin that I think they're getting ready to put on it, or they have been putting on it. If you look at the interview that was done by with the Blink-182 guy that I first brought into the subject, with Tom DeLonge, and it was all, the aliens are here to eat us for lunch and we need to go to war with them. And he's being fed disinformation from guys at the Pentagon, and he doesn't know that he's being played as a mouthpiece for the false information to the world. So they have people that they're using who are witting and unwitting mouthpieces for this agenda. And the agenda was set back in the 50s when Douglas MacArthur said World War III will be interplanetary. So these guys have been planning this kind of nonsense since about the time I was born, and I'm no spring chicken. And I'll tell you right now that the only thing that's a bigger threat to the world than keeping all the free energy technology secret and destroying the biosphere is the public being stampeded into a false flag, cosmic false flag like I'm talking about. Unfortunately, there's the thinnest line of sanity between that now and that happening. And we've got to get people, we need to have more whistleblowers who have known about this before it happens to expose it. Because if it's exposed in advance, they can't do it. You see what I'm saying? Because the public will know it's a hoax. And it's so much as like this man who was the senior scientist at the Naval Research Labs, the largest Department of Defense lab in the world, who for years was on my team. He has since passed away of cancer, God bless him. He was the third, literally the third highest ranking person at the biggest Department of Defense lab in the world, the Naval Research Labs in Washington. And he said in my home here with witnesses that I have, and stated that before 9/11, he was in Vice President Dick Cheney's office and saw the information and plans for 9/11 before it happened. Now, I've not talked about this publicly because I have, frankly, bigger fish to fry than the tragedy of 9/11, because we're talking about something that'd be a global tragedy. But, he says this kind of stuff is done all the time. And people forget that the entire Vietnam War was expanded greatly by President Johnson and the Congress because we exaggerated or hoaxed an attack on our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. A lot of people don't know this history. This is a matter of historical fact.
That's right.
And so there we have 58,000 of our young boys killed. We're just after Memorial Day here. I was just in Washington for Memorial Day. And trillions of dollars spent on these wars. And, of course, Iraq, they said, all the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had. He didn't have anything. And the people knew he didn't have anything. We got stampeded into a war that's cost hundreds of thousands of lives in the Middle East. And now we have ISIS and thousands of our own soldiers and tens of thousands who've been blown to smithereens with missing arms and legs and eyes. For what? And I tell people, I said, this is what's being fast-tracked. You need to wake up and smell the coffee, that all the scary stuff that's all over the Internet and all these radio shows and all these programs that go on and on and on about the threat and the alien threat, this is all concocted stuff that they're manipulating the public through propaganda to get them to accept the sacrifice in blood and treasure of the next big war, which they want to be interplanetary. And I'm telling people we have to expose this beforehand. And that's why I'm making a call for, now there are people out there who weren't in the military. We want people in the military and government intelligence and corporate world who know about this to come forward. But we also want people who've been victims of it. You know what I'm talking about, Dr. J. There are people out there who have had their cattle mutilated or who have themselves been abducted and had implants put in them, and they remember that it was that there were these weird-looking creatures that, by the way, are man-made that we call aliens, and there are military people running the show. We need those people to come forward, because there are people who, when they try to drug people and do these sort of mind control stuff with them when they're abducting them, they break through and they remember the military guy standing in the background telling the little man-made looking alien creatures to do it. And what people don't understand is that this has been going on since the 50s and 60s, where they've been hoaxing stuff like this. So there are people who've had real contact with ETs, and there are people who have had things that look like contact, that's scary as all get out, that they've been doing to create a false narrative, a false story. And in some cases, like the Benowitz affair, the story in New Mexico, where this woman saw one of our man-made anti-gravity devices near Sandia National Labs in Kirkland Air Force Base at the wee hours of the morning. What that was, they sent a squad to abduct her and make it look like an alien abduction. It was all humans. And then that made its way to Paul Benowitz, who ended up in a psychiatric hospital because it kind of blew his mind, all the tricks they were playing on him. But it was all to cover up the story that this woman had seen at very close range, one of our super secret spacecraft that were anti-gravity, which, by the way, we've had since the 50s. So I think people have to understand there's a very big game being played here. And there's a lot of deception, and there's a lot of false information out there that's designed to get people to go along, as Ronald Reagan did, with the whole Star Wars effort. And this is a very dangerous thing. So almost equal to and maybe worse than the fact that we're destroying the biosphere is that we have a false flag operation that they've already done all the propaganda for starting 60 years ago. People ask me, when would this happen? I said, it's been happening. It's already happening. You go to any UFO conference and thing, it's filled with information that is frightening to the public, that's designed to be put out there by these cosmic Manchurian candidates, I call them. And some of them are people who have been in the intelligence community, who've been in mind control programs where they're given drugs and also electronic holographic information, where they have all kinds of accounts of things going on out in space with humans and all kinds of horrible agendas. And it's all a program being run by their controllers. And this is not a science, it sounds like science fiction, I have to admit, but we need people to come forward who have an understanding that this is what's going on. So it's like the WHO when they said, we won't be fooled again. We cannot be fooled again the way we were in Vietnam and the way we were in Iraq. This is the big one. This is the one that the guy who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, Werner von Braun, warned us about. we can't be fooled again on this one. You know, if you had something that was any individual home or car, electric car, could be charged continuously, or even things that would run your computer or your household appliances continuously. At this point, anything that would prove the principle that is a closed loop running itself and puts out measurable wattage, which is power, and does real work in the real world in the classic definition of physics, then that's what we need. That's all we need, because it can be scaled up and scaled down. The key thing is to not keep it secret. Don't sit on it, because it's like these guys who sat on Stan Meyer's toroid. That was a free energy electromagnetic system that had a national security order on it. They worked on it, got it going, boom, they disappeared. And they did it secretively. They play on. Here's the thing: the strength of these fascists in the covert world is that they have mastered the world of secrecy. So if you're trying to keep your intellectual property secret, if you go the patent route through any government in the world, if you do it in a way that is discreet or obscure, they gotcha. There's only one pathway out: massive open-sourced disclosure. And by open source means you're bypassing the intellectual property route. Now, some people say, well, I worked for 20 years on this, I want to be compensated. I'm telling you, we can compensate you now. But our goal is to get it out there so that the plans are on the internet, and we have so many, we're going to have 1 billion of these devices to run the 2 billion households on the planet. You're going to need 2 billion of these devices. But we have to start somewhere. But we need something where we can prove this and get it out there so that it's no longer an urban myth. And I always say to people, free energy and perpetual motion is a misnomer, because there's a field of energy called the zero-point energy field that was proven decades ago in mainstream physics journals. And every cubic centimeter of space has enough potential energy within it to run the United States for a year. So the question becomes, you're not actually getting energy from nowhere. You're preserving the laws of thermodynamics and physics. It's just that there's another way that you're getting energy besides burning something or splitting the atom, causing all kinds of radioactive waste. So we have to figure out the facts are the American Federation of Scientists. And you can go to our website at SeriousDisclosure.com and see this document where they did a report and a press release on their national security project for this mainstream scientific group, the Federation of American Scientists, where they said, look, and Stephen Aftergood wrote this, and Mr. Aftergood said, there's 5,135 patents that have been confiscated under national security orders. And one example he gave was in the 1970s, a solar photovoltaic cell that would create electricity from the sun that was more than 20% efficient, which at the time was revolutionary. It'd be amazing now even. And they confiscated it. And so you can't claim that was some kind of a weapon. It was competing with coal and oil. And so they seized it. So this is such a corrupt system that anybody with a great breakthrough in energy needs to understand they can't play the game of the normal business, venture capital, patent, intellectual property game. Because if you play that game, they gotcha. But at the same time, I understand people wanting to be compensated for their efforts, and I think now luckily we have identified the people on my team who have the access to seriously large sums of funding for the environment and for energy efforts, that we can do that now. And we have a network that has exploded in the last year. Since Sirius came out 3 years ago, and it went to #1 on Netflix about 8 months ago, we have had such a huge network that's built up around what we're doing. And many of them are people that are, frankly, household names in America. that want to see one of these technologies. This whole question of when disclosure serves secrecy, I am very skeptical, frankly, of a lot of efforts where they will combine the hard evidence we've put together. Because, on our website, Serious Disclosure, there's dozens of top-secret witnesses. There's all these top-secret documents. There's all this hard evidence. And then what they'll do, they'll take it and then attach to the credible evidence a lot of discrediting material or things that really scare the hell out of the public in sort of a pseudo or false disclosure. And this has been the biggest battle we've been fighting. And I think that the public needs to have a heads up and not be fooled again if all of a sudden the mainstream media starts covering the issue, but then attaching and spinning this sort of a threat from outer space onto it. Because I always laugh and I say, look, if you can't prove a negative, but if there were overtly hostile civilizations out there, they would have cleaned our clock by the time we had detonated the first atomic bomb in 1945. Certainly by the time we started going out into space with weapons and our space exploration programs, which were a proxy for the military and the Cold War competition with the Soviet Union. I mean, they would have absolutely just said, hit the pause button. But that hasn't happened. And I think that what they're waiting for us to do, from the contact experiences my team has had for 25 years all over the world, is that they're waiting for us to become a reasonably civilized society, which is at least not murdering ourselves and destroying, creating what I call planeticide, the killing of an entire planet deliberately and with malice aforethought, which is what's happening with the environment, which is a completely unnecessary situation. I mean, there is absolutely no reason why we don't have zero-point quantum vacuum energy systems running everything, and so our environment would be pristine, 100% recycling of all materials. I mean, we could have a world that would be completely as pristine as it was, 2,000 years ago environmentally, and still have 7 billion people living on it if we stop living on it in a foolish way. And so I think that a civilization from any of these civilizations from other star systems are watching this, and a lot of people say, well, why don't they intervene and just fix it? I said, well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's like us going to Afghanistan trying to impose Jeffersonian democracy. We, the people of Earth, have to come together and make this happen. But you've got these people who are psychopaths, who are in the big money finance world and military-industrial complex, who really have an agenda that's nutty. And the agenda is this sort of an end-of-the-world apocalyptic view, because they don't understand anything. And they also want to be able to control the masses through fear. Because if you look at it, whether it's been through religious leaders or political leaders or what have you, it's demagoguery. It's fear that people respond to. And now what they're trying to do, and I've been watching this for 25 years, is to have someone else to demonize. I grew up in the South in the 50s and 60s and early 70s when there was still blatant racism and black and white water fountains, believe it or not. My girlfriend in high school was African American. I was almost murdered by some people who hated the fact that I had an African American girlfriend in North Carolina in 1972. So what I tell people is that humans are always trying to find someone to scapegoat and some new person to hate. So, it's got to be black people for one era, and then, there's misogyny, and then there's homophobia, so you have to hate all the gay people, and then you've got to hate this religious group or that religious group. And this is a real problem for humans. But ultimately, these guys, what they're wanting to do, these covert programs, they want to get people to unite around hating someone from outer space. So that would become the new source of, and it's sort of what I call it, interplanetary racism. And so what people need to understand, first of all, is educate themselves and be get the materials and educate themselves. Number two, spread the word to other people. If someone is skeptical, that's fine. Show them the Disclosure Project book, the DVDs, the materials where it's very solid, smoking gun. And what we are doing with this new film called Unacknowledged, and with the new book that will come out with it, is to put the best of the best of the best of the best in this 2-hour movie and in this book, so that it would be something that anyone would look at and go, case closed. We have the evidence. This is it. And then on top of it, the technology that explains how an UFO or an ET craft would be being able to have the ability to go from point A to B in space because of the energy needs. We can't figure out how to get to Mars without running out of rocket fuel. So I think that people have to understand that technology not only can explain how UFOs function, but it also will give us a new civilization on this planet so that we become acceptable to other civilizations in space that are waiting for us to behave in a civilized fashion. And part of being civilized is not only to quit massive wars and murders against each other, but also to stop destroying the biosphere. Because Gaia, the Earth is a conscious living being that is a biological organism that we are harming unbelievably. And, I'm part Cherokee Indian. When I talk to Native American people, that there's this sense of painfulness of seeing what we're doing to the oceans and to the land and to the air. That's completely avoidable. This is 100% avoidable. If we didn't have any alternatives, I'd say, well, it's a consequence of the Malthusian problem of billions of people living with 1800s era fossil fuel energy systems. But we have had technologies that could give us a civilization that would be prosperous and just and abundant and clean for the better part of 100 years. This goes way beyond the modern UFO era, back to the early days of Tesla and even before Tesla. And unfortunately, the people who have so much power in the centralized banking financial system and petrodollar system and oil and what have you, they don't want to see this change happen. 100 years ago, they didn't want to see it, and they don't want to see it today. But we, the people, have to rise up and say, too bad, you've had 150 years of dirty industrial global domination. Now it's time to move on to a new civilization on Earth, and we're going to make it happen. There have been weapons in space since 1965, at least. I have a top secret source who in the mid-60s was involved in that. And, the extraterrestrial civilizations are, many of them are hundreds of thousands to millions of years technologically more developed than we are. And, clearly if they wanted to solve the problem here, they could do it. But again, it would be an external imposition, so they're not doing that. Now, what the question about contact with CE5, the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, is that any interstellar civilization, let's be clear what I'm talking about here, a civilization can go from one star system to another at multiples of the speed of light. By definition, they are also transdimensional. So there's no concern about going through a debris field because they can dematerialize in one point in space and reappear at another point in space, passing through other dimensions. And this is all done electronically, by the way. So you're not dealing with something that's simply accelerating through space, because you have to go beyond the speed of light to go from another star system to here. Because if you were anything less than the speed of light, it would take way too long to get here. So you're not speeding up and going through debris fields or anything else. At the same time, there is a global positioned weapon systems that when these ET craft appear, they are targeted and they are sometimes hit. And this is what Lynn Stringfield in the 90s called the crash retrieval syndrome, where there were so many cases where these reports of ET craft that were targeted and crashed using electromagnetic weapon systems. And this is true. We have more than one Disclosure Project witness who has been party to retrieval operations. Now, this means that when we're doing the diplomatic effort that we're leading, called the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind Initiative, we have to understand transdimensional physics, transdimensional sciences, and how objects disappear at one point and reappear in another. I'll give you a great example. We were just in Arizona in a remote area on top of a mountain outside Tucson about a month ago. And when we were there, we had a number of events happen where objects would literally, they didn't fly in from space. They would just materialize right over us very briefly and then dematerialize. And then they would start doing all kinds of strange things through our electronic detectors, our magnetometers, our radar detectors, our laser detectors, our camera systems that would record. So there are all kinds of phenomena that attend a transdimensional civilization because they're able to drop out of linear space-time and go to another dimension and then reappear at another point in space-time. Also remember, they can be completely resonating beyond the speed of light where they're not visible to the naked eye or to any camera, and yet they're right there hovering right above you. And every once in a while, one of our digital cameras or an ultraviolet or infrared camera will capture them. And it's astonishing, these photos we have. But with the naked eye, you see nothing whatsoever. So a lot of the training I do to people is to bring people into the real space age, meaning the interstellar space age. And when you talk about interstellar, you're talking about beyond the speed of light. When you're talking beyond the speed of light, you're talking about a physics dealing with energy that is beyond the speed of matter and light. And therefore, you're talking about a whole new understanding of phenomena that happen. But it means that they can appear, they could be out near the rings of Saturn and then have a craft appear hovering right in the field beside us. And it might be seen by everyone for 10 seconds, dematerialize, and all you'll see will be something that looks like a hologram or like a ghost-like object that is moving around and is communicating with everyone in our contact group. Many enlightened masters have been able to materialize, dematerialize objects, levitate, bilocate, all these. So these are well known. If you study the Vedas from the ancient Vedas from the Himalayas, you really get into this whole idea, what have been called siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S. And I teach this at these week-long retreats that I teach, where people get a full course in the siddhis and the ancient Vedic knowledge of consciousness, but also of where mind and matter interface. And this is another part of what needs to be disclosed. When you're dealing with interstellar civilizations, they're not using cell phones and radio waves at the speed of light like we're using right now. They're using technologies that interface with coherent thought. So you think to the device and it is actuated, it turns on or does something. And in fact, this is what Dr. John at Princeton and Adam Curry, who is in the film Sirius and who I just recently have met with, are developing. They're developing lamps, for example, where you can think a color and it'll turn that color, and using random number generators that interface with consciousness and thought. So even in the human overt sphere, never mind what covert programs have, this is being looked at very seriously and scientifically. And I think that, the work of Dean Radin and the Goswami and Dr. John at Princeton, there are a lot of people who are doing things in the laboratory that we're doing basically, let's call it clinically, out under the stars. But it's the same concept, that consciousness in the mind is an omnipresent field, and you can develop meditation techniques to remote view, to communicate, and to create very clear, coherent thought that can interface with an extraterrestrial interstellar communication system to make contact. And that's part of what we do. And of course, this blows people's minds because most people don't understand how their smartphone works. But this is actually very simple if you understand the fact that the conscious awareness whereby everyone is awake is actually a singularity. And actually, Erwin Schrödinger, the father of modern quantum mechanics and particle wave theory in 1908, Erwin Schrödinger said this. He said the total number of minds in the universe is one. It's a singularity. So this is the true singularity, and everyone has that within them. And so through meditative techniques, you can access that expanded state of mind, remote view, and then use thought to connect to interstellar communication systems and make contact. And in fact, that's what we do with the CE5 initiative. When I first started bringing this out in 1990, a lot of people thought this is kind of crazy. Can this work? And now we have thousands of teams all over the world doing it and having extraordinary experiences. But some of the experiences don't conform to like a Star Trek movie, because you have to begin to understand how does an interstellar civilization interface, A, within a planet like ours that's become very armed, both in space and on the Earth with weapon systems tracking them, and B, how do they want us to understand a trans-dimensional interstellar reality? They're expecting us to get to a point in our own understanding where at least we're not Neanderthals, where we understand the nature of our true self and consciousness, but also the science of consciousness and the advanced electronic systems that exist that are interstellar that allow for communication and also teleportation again across vast distances in space. And they're not traveling they're not communicating using a radio wave or a microwave or anything like that. Those are all traveling at the speed of light. It's much too slow. And look, even a nearby planet, at 1% of the distance through our own galaxy is 1,000 light years. If it took at the speed of light, it would take 1,000 light years to communicate home, and another 1,000 years to get a signal here. So you're talking about 2,000 years at the time since the birth of Christ just to say hello, how are you, and the other end to say fine, thank you very much. So when you think about this and begin to understand it, you go, well, it makes complete sense that while some people would relegate all of this discussion to mysticism, it's not. It's the new science. Once we get past this disclosure period and get these technologies out that can save the Earth's environment and end all poverty on Earth and create a just world, the big sciences of the next 1,000 years are going to be in the science of consciousness and the interface between mind, matter, thought, all of that. Everything you were just talking about, levitation, materialization of objects. The human capability is unbelievable and has been demonstrated throughout human history. And right now, most people are just trying to scrape by a sort of a primitive existence. But that's a type of enforced macroeconomic slavery that's the result of the ignorance that has been enforced on the planet by these folks who do not want the public to become enlightened and have free energy and not be dependent on Big Brother or Big Oil or Big J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. I think you have to understand that when disclosure comes out in a way that is positive and truthful and brings out with it the sciences and technologies, all these big players who are, have amassed, and we're not talking billions, forget Bill Gates, we're talking hundreds of trillions of dollars in assets in these corporations and banking empires. Those are all going to become irrelevant because every single home and village will be self-sufficient. See, that's where we make a transition from a level 0 civilization, which is what we are now, to a level 1 civilization.